Good morning. If you are joining me live, good morning. If you are watching this later as a playback, welcome. I hope you enjoy this video. It will be a video when you watch it. I hope you enjoy. We are going live this morning a little earlier than I had planned, just because I have to go take care of some business. So I may try to come back on live later, but just in case I don't get home in time, I wanted to come on and talk with you a little bit as well as read a little bit. So good morning, welcome. I hope you are able to view this video. Let me just check my settings, make sure my microphone is on, because a couple of times recently when I joined, I didn't have my audio on, but I think it's on today. So hopefully you'll hear me. Good morning again. It is 11:05 in New York City. We're on daylight saving time for the next couple of weeks, and generally we have Eastern Standard Time. So it is 11:05 a.m. It is Thursday, October 9th, 2025. Welcome. This is a bookish space. If this is your first time watching one of my lives, on these lives, I try to share books that I have received. I will talk to you about the books that I have gotten. Occasionally, I have a new package that I can open and share it with you. My first impressions, you get to see. I get to see, but I also get to hold. And then, because I want to share the experience of my books with you, I'll read and give you like a first impressions reaction to the book. So today, I do not have a brand new bookish package to open, but I have a book that I received a few weeks ago and didn't get a chance to start. So I'm going to be starting it today. And if you saw the thumbnail, it's this book, Buckeye by Patrick Ryan. This book has gotten a lot of praise. It has been selected for the Read with Jenna book club. And so the Read with Jenna sticker is not a sticker, it is an embossing, I guess. The Read with Jenna embossing is right there on the book, and I don't mind because this was a free copy. That's a complimentary gift that the publisher has sent me to share with you. So in this live today, I'm gonna start reading this book. I took a sneak peek at the first page, so I read the first page already, but it's interesting enough that I want to read it to you. So that's what we're gonna do today. Good morning. Hi. Welcome. We are going to be we're going to be reading this book together for a few minutes. I don't know how long I'll be on here. I'm thinking maybe about 45 minutes because I have some business I have to go take care of. So we're going to start reading the book. Like I said, I opened it. I try not to read book synopses because I don't want to know summaries of what's going to happen. But I did read the first page and I thought it was really engaging. So I'm going to read it to you. If you've seen this book, if you've heard about this book, would love to know what your thoughts are about it so far. If you've read it, don't tell me too much. But if you've read it, would love to know. If you've read it, it's a brand new release. I think it came out last month. And we're going to read it together. I'm not going to read the entire book out loud, although I could not in one live, of course, but I could read that. Is that something that I would be allowed to do? I don't know. The book is a little under 450 pages, and I think I'm gonna like this one. When I logged in on Goodreads to say that I'm currently reading it, I saw that it has a 4.3, I think, average rating, 4.3 stars out of 5, which is excellent. Sometimes I saw someone talk about this recently, why book ratings go down. Quite often, a lot of the early readers are people who've been gifted copies or people who have to read the book for work. You work in a bookstore and it is part of your job as a bookshop, as a bookseller, to read the book so you can recommend it, if possible, to people coming in, or so that when someone comes in and asks what the book is about, you can have a conversation about the book. So booksellers tend to read books early. People who work in libraries, people who work as producers on TV shows or in book publicity in any way. People who work in the publishing companies, they don't just read the books that their publishing company produces, they also read books that are published by other companies, just so the bookish conversations can continue. A lot of early reviewers who are sent complimentary copies by publishers will also read books early. And even though we say that we don't want to be biased by receiving the gift, sometimes just the fact that the book has been gifted to you, you rate the book maybe a little more favorably. And that may not be as biased as it sounds, because sometimes when you're reading the book, if it's not for you, instead of rating it unfavorably, you'll just stop. So I think a lot of the early readers tend to rate books higher. I think that's just the reality of it. The longer a book stays around, the more likely it is that someone will pick up the book. It's not their kind of read, it's not the kind of book that they gravitate towards, but they may have just heard about it so many times that they say, all right, I'm just going to read this. Or they get involved with reading a book for a different reason, like if your book club is reading it, or say like next year, if it's a candidate for the BookTube prize or something, now you'll have to read the book even though it wasn't your first choice. And those ratings could be lower. So that is just some of the reasons I think why the rating tends to drop later. But initially, ratings tend to be higher. So right now, the book in its probably second month of being out, it has a rating on Goodreads of 4.3. But I've also heard some really good things. And a lot of the books that I have read that were chosen to be part of the Read with Jenna book club have been books that I've really enjoyed. So I have high hopes for this one going in. So I'm going to be reading Buckeye by Patrick Ryan. I know it has something to do with World War II. So I'm assuming it has like a 1950s American setting, because it is set in the United States. And I don't have a lot of experience with American books with World War II setting. I've read a lot of World War II books, historical fiction set in Europe, but a lot of the books that I have read that are 1940s, 1950s American setting that deal with the war are about like, let me think, like books by Julie Otsuka, which focus on what happened to Japanese Americans during that time. Read a few books like that. Even books by Viet Thanh Nguyen, like The Sympathizer, that kind of book that focuses on Asian Americans during World War II in the United States. But I've read a lot of books about like white Americans in the United States during World War II. So I'm really interested. I'm really intrigued to see how the author treats that topic in here. So thank you so much for being here. We're going to do a little reading sprint. We're going to start in about 2 minutes. I'm going to read. So I'm not going to start the timer right away because I'm going to read the first page or maybe page and a half to you to pique your interest for the book if you haven't already read it. So that's what we're going to do in the next couple of days, in the next couple of minutes. I don't have a bookish package to share with you. I'm getting a little concerned that the books that I requested from the publisher are not going to come because, like I was telling those of you who watched yesterday's live, I was locked out of my Yahoo email inbox for a little while, and I just assumed without any basis, I assumed that once I regained access to my inbox, that I would be able to see the mails that had, I would be able to see the emails that had come in while I was locked out. And so during that time, I had sent in the request to the publishers for the books that I wanted from this month's publications. And if they sent me a response, which they usually do, a response to say that I have been accepted and the book is on its way, if they'd sent that email during the time I was locked out of my inbox, they may have gotten a chargeback. It's not a chargeback. What do you call it? A bounce back, so that they would have been notified that I did not receive the email. And I don't know if that flags their system, and so maybe I won't get the books. I'm really concerned. So I will stop being concerned only when the books arrive. But for now, I don't have any brand new books to show you. So we're going to be reading Buckeye by Patrick Ryan. I'm going to read the first page and a half to you out loud so you can see what I'm reading, and then we'll start the reading sprint. So I'll continue reading, and if you have a copy and you want to read along with me, that would be great. Silent reading club. Otherwise, tell me in the comments what you're going to be reading. So, good morning, friends. Good morning to all the friends who are here. Alicia, Pretty Brown Eye Reader, is my friend from a long time. Hi, Alicia. Welcome, welcome. I don't know if you've been here for any of the lives while they've been happening. We are trying to just spend some time reading. Being with you guys helps me to actually read during the day. It also helps me to be able to talk about books and talk about something that I enjoy talking about. And that helps me with all the other things that are happening in my life, which I am not going to talk about right now. So I am going to read Buckeye, page 1. Buckeye by Patrick Ryan is set in Ohio, Bonamy, Ohio. Part 1. Chapter 1. Page 3. Here is the book. It's a really arresting first line too. Cal Jenkins was born in the spring of 1920 with one leg shorter than the other. It's a great first sentence, isn't it? Like, you want to know why. Why was he born with this physical challenge, and what his life was like. Like, you want to know, next line, what is his life going to be like in 1920s with two uneven legs. Cal Jenkins was born in the spring of 1920 with one leg shorter than the other, just 2 inches shorter. But that was enough to make plenty of things difficult. That's not a term, that's not a phrase that I hear too often here. Plenty things. That's a word that we use or used to use in Jamaica a lot. Plenty. I have plenty, you know. All right, sorry. I'm going to just read. Cal Jenkins was born in the spring of 1920 with one leg shorter than the other, just 2 inches shorter. But that was enough to make plenty of things difficult. Balancing on a bicycle took twice as long for him to learn as it did for other kids. Track and field was out of the question. So was walking without a pronounced limp, or going up and down a set of stairs without securing himself on the railing, until his father, amateur carpenter and junk collector, improved Cal's condition by carving a new, thicker sole out of tire rubber and nailing it onto his left shoe. At school, boys made fun of the way Cal walked, then made fun of the shoe with the extra thick sole. Someone noticed within an hour of the first day he wore it. But one boy, flush-cheeked and small for his age, pulled Cal aside during morning assembly and told him he was unique in God's eyes. "I know," the boy said, "because I am too. I can't touch my toes, you see. I have unusually tight hamstrings." He bent over to demonstrate, and his fingertips barely reached his kneecaps. "We're each meant for a special thing," the boy said. And when Cal asked what his special thing was, the boy shrugged and said the two of them would have to wait to find out. What they found out, separately and years later, after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and threw the country into a panic, after young men stopped waiting for their numbers to be drawn and began to volunteer, was that having one leg 2 inches shorter than the other was enough to make a person unfit for military service, while having unusually tight hamstrings wasn't. That boy, Sean Robison, was sent from Ohio to Mississippi for basic training and was then sent to Tunisia, and from Tunisia to Sicily, and from Sicily to Germany, where he was shot through the neck in the Hurtgen forest while reloading his rifle and reciting the Lord's Prayer. Cal remained in his hometown and got a job in a concrete plant. He read comic books and adventure novels into his 20s. He married a local girl named Becky and eventually went to work in her father's hardware store. Sometimes he wondered if he would ever discover what his special thing was, his purpose, he had decided, especially in the face of a world war that wouldn't have him. He was so conscious of not being overseas that he found his limp worsening all by itself. He told people about his leg, people who hadn't asked and didn't care. Sometimes he even pointed to his shoes, ordered now from a medical supply company in Dayton. My condition causes hip problems, he'd say, which was true, though he had yet to experience any. Should I keep going? This is interesting. Should I keep going? Should I read another paragraph? The next paragraph is pretty long. It's almost a page long. I just keep going. I'll just keep going. Bonamy. Bonamy had been found in a northwest pocket of Ohio in 1857 by a small group of merchants and their families, on land transformed by the last ice age when a glacier nudged its way down from Canada and melted, creating not only Niagara Falls and the Great Lakes, but also a vast swamp across the top of Ohio and Indiana that took 30 years to drain and left behind soil densely ripe for farming. The town was built with local lumber, shale, and limestone, and with granite from North Carolina, marble from Vermont and Colorado, and steel from Pennsylvania, all of it brought in by rail. For a time, the town was a grid of 9 streets, 4 running north-south and 5 east-to-west. The population grew from within as much as it could manage, and from without as much as it needed to. It swelled with migrant workers and their families during harvest time, corn and wheat and tomatoes and sugar beets, and shrank again when the workers moved on. Others moved into the area for the jobs created by the factories that sprang up around Hancock County. Immigrants from Italy, Austria, Hungary, Poland, Russia, and many other countries were processed through Ellis Island and absorbed by the cities and towns of the East, though some went west. And some of those stopped and settled down in Bonamy, which seemed as good a place as any. Over time, the original grid became known as downtown, and what wasn't downtown became known as neighborhoods. Not sections, which would have suggested clear dividing lines and the need for those lines, but general neighborhoods that took shape as people found their people. There were well-to-do neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods, and there were all the neighborhoods in between. There was a neighborhood called Tiller's Flat, where several Mexican families and nearly all the black families in town, less than a dozen, lived, many of whom had moved from the South for the industry jobs and to get away from the South. There was a neighborhood of apartment buildings and bungalows called Chesterton that was made up mostly of migrant families from out west, and a neighborhood situated between the 2 synagogues that was thought of as mostly Jewish. When people wanted an Irish neighborhood they could point to, they could always refer to the block with St. Catherine's and Good Shepherd School as Vatican City. And scattered throughout these neighborhoods were all the people who didn't think they belonged to any group, most of them Protestant. So I read 2 pages. Should I keep going? Should I keep going? I'm going to read 1 more page because I want you to meet a character, and then I'm going to stop. Hi, Runwright reads Girly, also known as Ruby24, also known as Sophia. Good morning. We're reading Buckeye by Patrick Ryan. By the time the US got into the Second World War, the population of Bonamy had topped 6,000. The town had its own police force, fire department, and vocational college. It had 24 restaurants, if you counted coffee shops and soda fountains, 5 banks, 4 dry cleaners, 2 record stores, and a movie house. Industry thrived in and around town, such as J&J Concrete, Tuck and Sons Aluminum, and the Mid-American Canning Company. And industry died, such as Ingleton's Fizzy Pops, Dilco's Feed and Supplements, and the Hancock Bell and Skillet Company. There was a horseshoe-shaped lake with a fetch of a quarter-mile just south of town off Route 18. To the north, where the exit ramp off Cooper Road fed onto Highway 23, the neon Tuck and Sons tulip, 20 feet in diameter, pink and flat as a stencil, stood atop a 100-foot pole, visible for miles. A rusted grain elevator, still bearing the checkered Purina logo, loomed like a monolith at the east end of Main Street. Passenger and cargo trains came through town day and night, and some of them stopped to deposit or collect people and mail and goods, but most of them bypassed the rail yard and the station and town altogether. Bonamy wasn't nearly so small that everyone Bonamy wasn't nearly so small that everyone knew everyone else. But it was small enough that sooner or later, most everyone felt as if they'd laid eyes on most everyone else. Since the start of the war, fewer and fewer young men were seen on Main Street. Meanwhile, there was no shortage of old-timers, 50 and up, who'd fought in the last big war. 50 is an old-timer? Okay. All right, Patrick Ryan. One ding. I'm just joking. There was no shortage of old-timers, 50 and up, who'd fought in the last big war. One who had lost an arm and wore his sleeve pinned, another who got around on wooden crutches because one of his legs had been blown off just below the knee. Carl's own father had been awarded a Purple Heart for taking a bullet through his shoulder while pulling a wounded officer into a foxhole in the Meuse, Argonne, though the medal was not to be seen in his increasingly cluttered house, and he didn't want to talk about his war days. Cal was astounded by the impact 2 inches of leg could have on a person. Being deprived of those inches, he had gained what seemed to be a full and healthy life. But feeling happy about it didn't seem right. Not when 1 million young men were inducted during the first year America got into World War II, and 10 million by early May of 1945. That Tuesday morning, Cal had just opened Hanover Hardware on Sutton Street and was sitting on a stool behind the counter, sorting a box of washers, when a woman walked in and asked if he had a radio. Do you want to meet the woman? Her forehead was high, and her red hair was done up in victory rolls. Her mint green dress and matching pillbox hat, her white gloves, and her coral lipstick suggested money to Cal. Her eyes latched onto his as she crossed the linoleum floor. He told her, yes, the store had a Zenith, but it wasn't for sale. It was in the office. She asked where the office was. Basement, Cal said, nodding towards the stairs just past the end of the counter. And without another word, she walked past him, right past the handwritten sign that read, Employees Only, and started down the stairs. Ma'am, Cal said. He dropped the washers into the box and followed her. The basement was used mostly for overstock, though there hadn't been much to store in the past few years, with production focused on the war effort. Cal caught up with her as she made her way between 2 tall sets of half-empty shelves. He indicated the area in the corner that the store's owner, his father-in-law, Roman Hanover, had designated as the office. Across from the cot where Roman took his naps was a pint-sized desk where they did paperwork and where Cal ate his lunch, listened to radio programs, and read adventure novels. He was currently halfway through The Bold Buccaneer. He tugged on the string for the overhead bulb, and in its glow he noticed the deep jade of her eyes and saw how pronounced her cheekbones were, giving her face a V shape over the smooth stem of her neck. She was beautiful, he realized. but she looked agitated, impatient. She motioned toward the radio with one of her gloved hands. Why isn't it on? He switched on the zenith, surfed the wheeze and static for whatever she was hoping to hear, and within seconds, he found it. Truman, informing the country that Germany had surrendered to the Allied forces. It was the announcement that everyone had been anticipating. Hitler had been dead for a week. The Nazis had surrendered the Netherlands to the British 5 days earlier. Still, the news was breathtaking. Through the hopper window that opened onto the street, they heard shouts and whistles, a car horn tap, tap, tapping, then another and another. Geez, Cal said, can you imagine what it's like in Berlin right now? I probably would have been there if it weren't for... He wobbled his shoe with the extra thick sole. But she was looking at the caramel-colored radio. Her eyes were glistening. Do you think... she said, then paused as if unsure of what she wanted to ask him. She took a breath. Do you think people will start coming home? From Europe? I hope so. But Hirohito is still giving us a run. They might send those guys over to the Pacific. The woman blinked against the sting in her eyes and, as Truman continued talking, looked at this hardware store clerk who, when he'd been sitting behind the counter, had been almost handsome with his gray-blue eyes, his wavy blonde hair that looked as if he had just raked his fingers through it, his narrow jaw, and an early set of lines framing his mouth. Now that she could see all of him, he was still almost handsome, but in a different way. He wasn't very tall, and his stance was off, his hips pitched at an almost uncomfortable-looking angle. His golden black striped tie was tucked between two buttons halfway down the front of his Oxford shirt and looked wrong that way. She wanted to pluck it out. Instead, she took him by his shoulders, pulled him toward her, and kissed him. Cal would have gasped if his lips weren't against hers. They kissed until Truman finished speaking. When they stepped back, she turned off the radio. He heard her sniffle, offered her his handkerchief. She touched it to the outside corners of her eyes as she glanced at the cot and pint-sized desk, the brown bag with the apple beside it, the library book with the swashbuckling cover. Does a child live down here? No, Cal couldn't account. No, Cal couldn't account for the alarm in his voice, the awkwardness of their proximity, maybe. Now that the announcement was over, they had no reason to be in the basement. This is just where we do the invoicing and ordering, and she said, I'm Margaret, by the way. Salt, like the shaker. Cal Jenkins. They shook hands and smiled at how formal that felt, given what had just happened between them. I should go, Margaret said. He followed her back upstairs, his shoes clomping unevenly. She told him she'd been walking down the street and had noticed people rushing to their cars, everyone switching on their radios. She could tell something was happening, but hadn't known whom to approach. She thanked him, then ran her eyes over the shelves, the end cap displays. I've lived in this town for almost 6 years, and I've never been in here once. Cal just nodded, thinking. I would have remembered you. He watched through the front window as she made her way up the sidewalk. Car horns were still sounding off. A boy had climbed onto the mailbox across the street and was making a bullhorn with his hands, broadcasting the surrender. Cal ought to call home, he knew. See if Becky had the radio on. She would want to know, even if she wouldn't want to talk to him. He dragged the back of his hand across his mouth and spotted a smear of coral lipstick on his thumb, astounded all over again by what had just happened. As long as he remained standing at this window, he told himself, as long as Margaret Salt was still in his sight, he was still the guy who had had to wipe a beautiful stranger's coral lipstick off his face. She turned the corner onto Durban Street and was gone. Buckeye by Patrick Ryan. I like that a lot. I like that even though it is two strangers being intimate in a way that they shouldn't, given that Cal is married. Whew. But I think and I wouldn't want this in my own life, okay? But I think it's understandable the intimacy, them being overcome by what's happening, because to have been alive in this time and to have known about what the war was, what they knew about the war, and to just now be hearing that at least this phase of the war is over, the anticipation of the people that you know who had gone to war, are they coming back home? Is this over? Is this nightmare over? I think it's um I don't want to say excusable, but it may be understandable that they could just get overcome with what they just heard and do things that they wouldn't normally do, given their commitment for marriage and the other things. But I feel like the fact that we know that Kyle's married, we know that he's married, right? We know that he married a girl named Becky. He married a local girl named Becky and went to work in her father's hardware store. So he's in his in law's business when Margaret comes in and just pretty much sweeps him up. And yeah, so we know it's wrong, but Alicia says, I wonder if Margaret is married also. So I could tell you the answer to that because it appears in the synopsis, but I won't tell you just because it hasn't appeared in the text yet. Yeah, the next few pages are probably just as intriguing. We learn a little bit more about Cal. We go back in time. So the next paragraph starts with the line 3.5 years earlier. One look at Jenkins, Calvin M. had told the army doctor all he needed to know. Barefoot, Cal was unable to stand completely straight or even hold his shoulders level. And they're going into the scene of seeing Cal in his earlier life, 3 years earlier, but also it seems like it does a few other flashbacks. So it could just kind of going back. Really interesting and intriguing, which is exactly the kind of book that I need to read right now. It has to be intriguing, like really immediately arresting to hold my attention. So I am going to continue reading this. Should I read more out loud? I won't I can't read the whole thing, but if you want to hear more, I could definitely read a few more pages. It's really good. Flipping some pages, I see that we are going to get a little bit of following Becky, because Kyle's wife needs to appear herself. We certainly haven't, we don't see Kyle thinking too much about her. When he thinks about her right now, to think about whether or not she is also listening to the radio announcement, the line says she would want to know, even if she wouldn't want to talk to him. Which opens up all these questions for me. Why isn't Becky talking to him? Is it because Kyle has a penchant for kissing strange, formally dressed women in his in-laws' hardware store? Get the sense that this hasn't happened to him before, but if Kyle just allows himself to be swept up by people, I don't think that would make for a very happy marriage, a very happy wife. Yeah, interesting. And we want to like Cal because he's a reader. He reads adventure novels, eats his lunch, listens to radio programs, and reads adventure novels. Doesn't he sound like a guy that we want to root for? We also need a book that is 450 pages or so. We need a strong character to hold us through this plot, right? So we want Cal to be someone that we can support in a lot of ways. And not just because of his physical challenge, we also need him to be a nice guy, stand-up guy, even if a little I don't want to say the word that I'm thinking. Even if he's not perfect, we want him to definitely be main character energy. So I don't know. Should I read more? Should I read more? Alicia wants to know if Margaret is married. Um, I don't think the next few pages will answer that question. Tangible Reads. Hi, Tangible Reads. Tangible Reads says the book sounds sad. I think it will be sad in some ways, but I also think that it has to be hopeful. Otherwise it would lose some of the readers because, we know about the sadness of World War II. We also know about the sadness sometimes of people living with challenges, especially during a time where a lot of things are not accessible. Um, but I think this book, for it to be the book of, what's the blurb say? Anne Patchett says it's a glorious sweep of a novel. And Napolitano says, I love this book with my entire heart. Other blurbs from Tom Hanks. A novel that connects the American generations who dealt with our two wars. And, okay, Alice McDermott calls it heartfelt, harrowing, absorbing, sympathetic. Yeah. Tom Perrotta talks about mystery and family life and other things, which I think will be spoilers. But yeah, Emily Friedland calls it a deeply compassionate book. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of sadness, but also a lot of other things that will kind of rein that in. So it will feel just like a book with heart. So I will read. I'll read a couple more pages. I don't know where I'm going to stop. So this was going to be a reading sprint, but it's turned out to be a group reading sprint. I hope you're enjoying. This is a different kind of life. We've never done this before. So every day is something different, and I like that. All right, I will read a couple more pages. 3.5 years earlier, one look at Jenkins, Calvin M. had told the army doctor all he needed to know. Barefoot, Cal was unable to stand completely straight or even hold his shoulders level. Try the Citizens Defense Corps, the doctor said. I'm sure they can use you. It was January of 1942, less than a month after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Bonamy Recruitment Center was full of symmetrical young men waiting to enlist. Would I get a uniform? Someone behind Cal snickered. An armband, I think, the doctor said. Thanks for coming in, son. Get dressed and go on home. He wrote something on Cal's card, stamped it, and handed it to the nurse for final processing. But Cal had gotten the afternoon off from the concrete plant for this, not knowing how long it would take. And he was living in a single room with kitchenette in Mrs. Gautier's creaky Queen Anne on 3rd Street. Not exactly a place where he wanted to sit around and sulk. He steered his chalk-red Nash through the snowy streets to Paulson's Food Market instead, and bought groceries with his father's ration book, then drove them out to the old man. The acre of land just west of town and the yellow 2-story house that stood on it hardly resembled the place where Cal had grown up. His brother Robert had died of influenza when Cal was 6. His sister, Grace, of tuberculosis when he was 9. Also that year, his mother, Dora, of several ailments but mostly pneumonia. That had left just Cal and his father, and Cal had moved out as soon as he turned 18. It was hard to know what shape the house and the old man might have been in if it weren't for the war. Not the current war, the one before it. And all the unrelated death in the family that had come after, and all the drinking that fueled his father's hardship. There was a willful out-of-reachness to Everett, now that seemed to deepen with his... Let me read that again. There was a willful out-of-reachness to Everett, now... I didn't get it. There was a willful out-of-reachness to Everett now that seemed to deepen with his pitted cheeks, an appetite for suspicion and a compulsion for stockpiling that became more ravenous with each passing year, all of which made it a good thing the house wasn't in town. On a regular basis, Everett was seen pedaling his cart through the streets of Bonamy and stopping to pull items out of dumpsters and trash cans. Now and then, someone hollered at him or complained to the town. More than a few times, a 22 was fired at a passing car from one of his attic windows, and a deputy had to be sent out. The old crackpot on Compton Road was at it again. The trouble was the way his father's brain worked, Cal thought. The trouble was also all of the stuff. Everett had just barely managed to scrape his family's way through the Depression and couldn't abide by waste. He kept clothes from decades past, his own and what he found. He kept food he was never going to eat, food that had gone bad. He kept magazines, newspapers, calendars, can labels, buttons, matchbooks, pencil stubs, the skulls of rabbits and squirrels he'd shot and eaten, spools of thread and coils of rope and wire, cast iron skillets and rejected bells and clappers from the defunct bell factory. He kept every make and manner of kitchen utensil he had found by rummaging through the town dump or through other people's garbage cans. He kept envelopes, catalogs, birthday cards sent to strangers. He maintained no liquor cabinet, but stationed and hidden around the house were bottles of all kinds of booze he had bought or found or been given as payment for some odd job. In the backyard were 5 Model Ts, none of them drivable. They had become receptacles for empty cans and mason jars, for scrap wood and car parts. One car, rolled off the assembly line the year Cal was born, had been turned into a chicken coop. The old man was 61, had lived under 14 presidents, 6 from Ohio. And though his vision was teeming with floaters and cataracts, he'd been writing letters to all of them since Woodrow Wilson. He had no interest in barbers, cut his own hair, let his graying beard grow wide and wiry. He was thin. If you were to encounter him naked, you would see his bones poking to get out, not because of any ailment, but because food was an afterthought to him now that he lived alone. He was in the backyard when he heard Cal's tires roll onto the gravel driveway. He heard the engine shut off, and a few moments later, he heard Cal's knock on the front door. Then footsteps rounding the side of the house, soft shattering the thin layer of new snow that had frozen to a crust during the night. Pop! A cardinal drew a crimson line across the snow. There was Cal, standing between the pint-sized Coca-Cola chest and the wardrobe, a sack of groceries under his arm. Ears working today, Pop? Fine. Not fine, since Saint Michel, actually, but functional. If I didn't know better, Cal said, I'd think you were getting fat. How many layers have you got on? Everett, who had on 4 jackets, 2 scarves, a mackinaw, and under it all a pair of pajamas, was dragging a wheel with a tire sagging around it toward the garage behind the house. In the few days since Cal had last stopped by, his father had somehow managed to raise each of the 5 Model Ts and remove all 20 of their wheels. The cars sat on jacks and stump cuts. The wheels and their flattened tires lay in a heap beside the garage, except for the one he was dragging through the snow. All of which suggested to Cal that at least his father hadn't been on a bender. What are you doing? As if tired of having to answer that question, though he hadn't spoken to anyone since Cal's last visit, Everett, dragging the tire another few feet, said testily, keeping my rubber and metal out of certain clutches. There were trails through the snow connecting each of the cars to where the wheels and tires now lay. What clutches, Pop? Institutional, Everett said, without looking up at him. Governmental. If you want it typed up, you'll have to wait till I have time. He let the tire fall over as he clapped snow off his gloves, powdering it onto his beard. Cal nodded. Guess I'll put these away. He carried the groceries up the sagging back steps and into the mudroom where he'd once sat on a bench to take off his shoes when he got home from school. The bench was buried under newspapers and catalogs now, tools and coats and blankets piled opposite it, so that the path through the mudroom was almost too narrow to walk. Then into the kitchen, where his mother, blonde like him, and his sister had once cooked their meals and helped them with their homework and recited the capitals of the 48 states by heart. All but one of the chairs were piled with flats and boxes. The table so heaped with junk it was barely discernible as a table. The floor drooped in places and creaked wherever a foot could get to it. The ceiling was a storm front of water stains. Everett had claimed to be glad when Cal, at the age of 18, told him he was moving out. He had said he was sick and tired of Cal nagging him about the way they lived, about the condition of the house and his drinking. Nagging since Cal was 11. Everett was right on the math. That was the year after Cal's mother had died. The year everything had somehow gotten worse. Cal couldn't shake the feeling that out of the family, he was the last one his father would have wanted to be left with. And here the two of them were. He stacked the groceries on the only free section of counter he could find, then filled the bag with things he'd brought in weeks past that had gone bad. Collapsed fruit, rock-hard bread, a soft, slippery onion. He carried the stinking bag through the front door and out to the trunk of his car so his father wouldn't be able to dig through it after he was gone. In the yard, Everett unwound the brass wire from the joint handles of the double garage doors and pulled the doors open, making wings in the snow. There wasn't enough room for 20 tires in there, he deduced, even flat ones. He'd have to pull a few things out, decide what could be sacrificed to thieves should any come around while he was asleep or away. More than a few things now that he thought of it, because he also had to make room for the soda chest, all the car parts, the cans, the flashing and lengths of stovepipe. Yes, every bit of metal and rubber visible to the naked eye had to be hidden away. He was dragging a sideboard out of the garage when Cal reappeared. Let me help you. His father wagged his bearded head. No. This wasn't even yours, Cal said, touching the wood. Everett got the sideboard far enough out so the garage doors would clear it, then leaned his elbows on it and peered at Cal. His eyes bloodshot, maybe just with annoyance. You came to bring me food? Cal nodded. And now you've brought it? Yes. Everett shifted his mouth around as if trying to separate a bit of fish from a bone. I'm busy. Cal took in the yard, a disorganized cemetery of crap, all of it covered with snow. From the driver's seat of one of the Model Ts, a chicken raised its head and cast a sideways eye. There are a lot of guys signing up at the recruitment center, he said. Volunteering. It's something to see. They're lined up down Union Street. Everett tugged on one of the sideboard drawers. He banged it with his fist and tugged again. Empty. I wanted you to know, I tried to enlist this afternoon. For years, Everett had been bowing to gravity the way old men sometimes do. Now, right before Cal's eyes, he appeared to straighten, grow taller, till his gray-blue eyes were level with Cal's. Why? Why? Because I want to be a part of this thing, that's why. Fight the Axis. You know what it's like. You enlisted. Everett winced. Listen to you. Fight the Axis. And you didn't ask me first? I don't need to ask, Pop. I'm 21. I've been registered for 3 years. Well, it was a waste of time. They didn't take you, did they? Because of your leg? No. Everett's posture deflated again. He worked open the second drawer of the sideboard, looked in, shoved it closed. Meanwhile, they've bumped the registration age up to 64. They'd probably take me tomorrow, but they turned you down? Isn't that a kick in the teeth? Kyle slipped his hands into his pockets. Anyway, I tried. You shouldn't have bothered. I keep writing to that SOB in the White House. I keep telling him I see right through him, right through this whole mess. If we cut off Japan's oil, I said, Japan will come after us. But you know what? He wanted them to come after us because he couldn't wait to get us into this thing. He just about puts the whole Navy in one port. And now we've got more than 2,000 men dead. Some of them didn't even have time to put their pants on. Everett leaned sideways and spat. The day you were born and one of your legs come up short. The doctor said you were healthy except for the deformity. And right then I thought, well, that's it. If we get into another big one, he'll never be in it. Wanting to put space between himself and his father and the word deformity, Cal said, all right, Pop, I'll see you in about a week, and started toward his car. Hey, Everett called. A moment later, damn, stop! Cal kept walking. How poorly thought out this entire day had been. When would he learn? When would he stop trying to impress the old crank? He reached the Nash and was opening the driver's door when something smacked hard against the back of his coat. A snowball, it turned out, shaped and hardened by tired, arthritic hands. Everett stood several feet away, huffing from having moved so quickly, his breath crystallizing in front of him. He said, I'm glad, is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay. All right. I can't read it. I can't read anymore. I shouldn't read anymore. That was page 15. So I read about 10 pages of this. If you want to read more, I'll come back. But I have to go. I think that I am going to enjoy reading this. And if you want me to read more out loud, let me know. I'll come back on later or tomorrow and I'll read more. Roomy 24 is listening to me read while cleaning her room. I did that earlier. That was one of the things that I did today. I cleaned some rugs. We have a little wet vac that got to go down on my hands and knees to actually clean the rug. So it's more like a spot cleaner, but I use it to clean the upholstery. So I was doing that this morning as well. Thank you so much for being here with me. I enjoyed reading this. So just in case you are just joining, we're reading Buckeye by Patrick Ryan. And I read out loud from page 5, where it starts, to page, almost the bottom of page 15. There are like 2 lines left on page 15. And so we're reading about Cal, who is wanting to join the army in World War II. He's an American living in Bonamy, Ohio, and wanting to join, but is being rejected because of his physical condition, where one of his legs is shorter than the other. We do know that it doesn't stop Cal from living a pretty full life, but the army doesn't want to be responsible for his inability to keep up, I guess. So they're not taking him, and his father seems like, the, what's the word? His father's definitely changed after having fought in the war and lost most of his family. And he says, I'm glad is what I'm trying to tell you, after he smacks him with a snowball. So we're reading Buckeye by Patrick Ryan. It has been selected for the Read with Jenna book club. And I have enjoyed books that I have read that were selected by Jenna. So I have high hopes for this as we go forward. Let me know if you have, I didn't leave you anytime. We didn't actually do a reading sprint. So, Tangible Reads, yeah, I'm going to have to leave too, but I'll come back on later. I'll try to come back on later. I'm not sure what the afternoon will hold, if I'll be back in time to do another live before I pick up my daughter. But if I can, I will come back on and spend some more time with you guys. But just want to thank you all for joining this morning. That was really fun. I'd like to do more of that. I do occasionally read books out loud on the channel. There are a few books that I have read, a chapter per video or 2 chapters per video, or if it's a really long chapter, a chapter over 2 videos. And some of those are videos that have gotten a lot of engagement because they're helpful for people. I used to think that reading was a solitary activity, but there are lots of people who enjoy reading or need to have books read to them. And so that's something that I have enjoyed doing over the years. Would definitely love to do it again. The books that I have read in that way have been older books. I've never read a brand new book. I don't know if I should. So I won't read all of this, but I really enjoy oh, Ruby. Thank you, Sophia. Yeah, you know, you don't need to read a book by yourself to enjoy it. And that's what book clubs and bookish groups and booktube channels and all the bookish platforms, that's what it's for, so that we can share the experience of enjoying a book, reading a book. being being educated or informed by a book. We can share that with other people. So just want to thank you. Thank you so much to the publishers for having gifted me this book and the opportunity to share this experience with you. So I gotta go now, but I will come back later. If you haven't already, please click that you like the live so it gets recommended to other people. And so even if they don't get a chance to watch it right now, they can watch it as a playback. So thank you so much for being here. I hope whatever you do for the rest of the day or evening, wherever you are, that you have a lovely time. And I'll see you later, whether it's later today or tomorrow or sometime soon. Thank you and happy reading. Bye. Good afternoon. Bye, my cozy little library. Have a great afternoon. Thank you all. Thank you, Alicia, pretty brown-eyed reader. I appreciate your being here. Tangible Reads, enjoy your walk. And Sophia, bye.